Hello. Today we bring stories told on Reddit and what if they were true? It's going to be fine, said Ellie as our Honda Civic drove along the winding road cutting through Kosciuszko National Park. Everyone always goes to the same tourist spots. This place I found is practically unknown. I smiled and squeezed her hand over the center console. It was our 3rd anniversary, and after exhausting weeks at the hospital where we worked, me as an emergency resident, her as a nurse, the idea of escaping to somewhere isolated seemed perfect. The GPS lost signal 20 minutes after we left the main road. The daylight was fading quickly, painting the sky orange and purple as the eucalyptus forest around us grew denser. "Are you sure you know the way?" I asked, watching the shadows stretch. "Trust me, Nathan, I came here with my dad when I was a kid." She pointed to a barely visible trail on the right. "There. Turn there." The narrow path barely accommodated our car. Branches scraped against the sides as we moved forward slowly. After about 500 meters, the vegetation opened up into a small natural clearing overlooking a deep valley. The sun had completely set, but the sky still held a purple glow on the horizon. Wow. I was genuinely impressed as I parked facing the valley, the headlights illuminating the darkness ahead of us. "Told you it would be worth it." Ellie smiled, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Let's step outside. The air is incredible here." Australian, autumn brought that peculiar mix of warm days and cold nights. I put on my sweatshirt as we grabbed a small picnic basket and a blanket from the trunk. I left the headlights on, partially lighting the clearing and the edge of the forest. We settled on the hood of the car with sandwiches, a bottle of wine, and the comforting silence of two people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. The sky gradually revealed a spectacular star map, free from Sydney's light pollution. "Do you hear that?" Ellie asked after a few minutes. I focused. Beyond the soft hum of nocturnal insects and the occasional rustling of leaves, there was a deep silence. "I don't hear anything specific." "Exactly." She leaned against my shoulder. "No beeping heart monitors, no speakers calling doctors, no ambulances. Just peace." I took a sip of wine, feeling the tension of the past few weeks begin to fade. It was at that moment that I noticed. Part of the silence was unnatural. The insects near the forest's edge had suddenly stopped. A cold sensation ran down my spine. "Ellie," I whispered, "something's wrong." She frowned. "What?" "I don't know exactly, but I feel..." I couldn't find the words. It was a primal instinct, an alert embedded deep in the DNA of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. My eyes scanned the tree line beyond the headlight's reach. "Something is watching us." Ellie followed my gaze. "It's probably just a kangaroo or a wallaby. There are lots of them in this area." "No, it's something bigger." The certainty in my voice made her reconsider. We silently slid off the hood and got inside the car, leaving the food and blanket behind. Through the windshield, I kept watching the forest, now with all my senses on high alert. "There." I pointed at a subtle movement between two large trees about 20 meters away. "Did you see that?" Something substantial had moved in the darkness, not with the characteristic hop of a kangaroo, but with a fluid, deliberate glide. I realized the headlights were no longer a comfort, but a problem. We could only see where the light reached, while anything in the dark could see us perfectly. "Nathan, you're scaring me," Ellie murmured, her voice trembling. Another movement, this time closer. A large, dark shape slipped between the trees, partially illuminated by the peripheral light of the headlights. My heart pounded. "Don't move," I whispered, even though we were inside the car. "I think it's some kind of predator." "There aren't any large predators in Australia," she responded automatically. but her tense posture suggested she didn't fully believe her own words. What we saw next defied everything we knew about Australian wildlife. The creature stepped closer to the edge of the illuminated area, still partially obscured by the long shadows of the eucalyptus trees. It was big, larger than a human, and at first it appeared to be on all fours. Its fur had a yellowish-gray tone that strangely absorbed the light, creating an almost matte effect around its outline. "What the hell is that?" Ellie gripped my arm tightly. The creature stopped as if it had heard her voice. Then, in a movement that will be burned into my memory for the rest of my life, it stood up on its hind legs. Standing, it must have been over 2 meters tall. Its disproportionately long arms hung beside a muscular torso. Its head was vaguely canine but with a more elongated facial structure, and its eyes were positioned in a way that allowed forward vision. Like a predator, I locked eyes with it, yellow reflecting the headlights like a cat's, and saw an intelligence that was ancient and calculating. Not human intelligence, but something equally complex and infinitely more dangerous. "Start the car," I murmured, not taking my eyes off the creature. "Now." Ellie slid into the driver's seat as I kept my gaze locked on the creature, fearing that any sudden movement would trigger an attack. The engine coughed once before starting, and that sound was all it took. The creature lunged. It wasn't a leap or a run. It was a movement so fast it almost seemed like teleportation. 1 second, it was at the edge of the forest, and the next, it was just a few meters from the hood, fully visible under the headlights. Its face wasn't exactly that of a dog or a wolf, as I had initially thought. It had canine features, yes, but also almost primate-like characteristics, with a more pronounced forehead and a facial structure that suggested the ability to display complex expressions. At that moment, the expression was pure predation. "Go," I shouted as the creature moved toward the car. Ellie slammed the gear into reverse and pressed the accelerator. The car shot backward, almost skidding on the uneven ground. Through the windshield, I saw the creature lunge into the space we had occupied just a second earlier, its long claws briefly reflecting the light before vanishing into the darkness. Navigating the narrow trail was a nightmare. Branches scratched the windows as Ellie reversed as fast as she dared in the darkness. When we finally reached the wider dirt road, she stopped just long enough to turn the car around before speeding off again. Neither of us spoke until we were back on the paved main road, with the occasional lights of other vehicles bringing a sense of return to civilization. "What the hell was that?" Ellie finally broke the silence, her voice still shaking. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "It didn't seem natural." "A yowie," she murmured. "My dad used to tell stories about them, the Bigfoot of Australia. I always thought they were just legends." "Maybe they are." I tried to sound rational, clinical, like the doctor I was. "It could have been a large dingo or some injured animal that looked different in the dark. The human mind fills in gaps when it has limited information." But even as I offered logical explanations, the image of those intelligent, calculating eyes remained vivid. The way the creature moved, not like an animal, but like something that knew its territory and recognized us as intruders, as prey. We never told this story to anyone but ourselves. Who would believe us? If we shared our encounter, we'd only be ridiculed, hearing the same rational explanations I had just given. Or worse, we'd be classified along with crazy monster hunters and conspiracy theorists. But some nights when sleep doesn't come easily, I relive that moment when the creature stood up on 2 legs and stared at us. And I wonder how many other things exist in the ancient forests of this continent that science has yet to catalog or understand. And I wonder if that night, we weren't the ones who discovered something, but rather, something that discovered us. What did you think of this story? comment on what impacted you. Let's move on to the second story. The first email from Emma arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. Responding to a comment I had made on a forum about Russian literature, her message was articulate, insightful, and surprisingly personal. We exchanged thoughts about Dostoevsky, then about our lives, and soon our daily emails turned into nightly video calls. Emma lived in Edinburgh, while I was in Melbourne, 2,500 miles and 9 time zones apart. Still, within 6 months, our long-distance relationship had more depth than any other I had ever experienced. We were planning our first in-person meeting for December. It was in August that the company hired Sophie as a marketing analyst. Tall, with dark hair and striking green eyes, she introduced herself with an almost excessive enthusiasm on her first day. "Daniel, right? I've heard a lot about you." Her handshake lasted a few seconds longer than was comfortable. "Our cubicles are next to each other. I think we're going to be great friends." At first, Sophie just seemed friendly, bringing coffee occasionally, offering help on projects, asking questions about my life. I casually mentioned Emma, even showing a picture of her on my desk. Sophie examined the image for a long moment. "Long distance relationship?" she asked with a strange smile. "Those rarely work out. Trust me, I've been in a few." In hindsight, that conversation was the first sign. The next signs came quickly. Sophie started mirroring my habits, arriving at the same time, frequenting the same cafe for lunch, even changing her style to reflect mine. I noticed that she monitored my conversations, coincidentally appearing whenever I spoke with female colleagues. On social media, Sophie liked and commented on every post of mine within minutes, even those made at 3 a.m. She began mentioning details about my life that I had never shared at work. About my brother, in Brisbane, my peanut allergy, the name of my first dog. "How do you know that?" I asked after she mentioned the address of the school I had attended. "You must have mentioned it," she replied casually. "I have a great memory for details about people who interest me." During a company party, Sophie showed up wearing a dress, almost identical to the one Emma wore in the picture on my desk. When I went to the restroom, she followed me into the hallway, pressing me against the wall. "We have chemistry, Daniel. You know it." Her breath smelled of wine and something stronger, almost predatory. "She's halfway across the world. I'm right here." I pulled away, mumbled something about commitment and loyalty, and quickly returned to the main area. The next morning, I requested a transfer to another department. The transfer only intensified her obsession. Sophie sent dozens of messages daily, ignoring my silence. I started noticing her car parked near my apartment. One morning, I found a Yao rose on my windshield with a note. "We both know it's only a matter of time." I changed my phone number. 3 days later, I received a message from her on my new number. "New number, same feelings, right?" I blocked her contact. I created new social media profiles with strict privacy settings. I started varying my routes to work, frequenting different cafes, never establishing predictable patterns. During a video call, Emma noticed my anxious state. "You seem tense lately," she observed. "Does this have anything to do with that coworker you mentioned?" Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with a notification. Sophie had just tagged me in a photo. Somehow she had found my new secret profile. The picture showed my apartment building with red circles marking my windows. In October, Emma bought tickets to visit me in December. That same week, Sophie showed up at my parents' house in Brisbane, 1,050 miles from Melbourne. "Your son and I have a special relationship," she told my confused mother. "I just wanted to meet my future family." My parents, alarmed, called me immediately. I filed a police report, but without explicit threats, the authorities could do little beyond issuing a formal warning. The incident that finally broke me happened during a company presentation. As a project manager, I was presenting our new campaign to the entire team and some clients. During the Q&A session, Sophie raised her hand. Instead of asking a question about the project, she recited my full address, including the access code, to my building. Then, with a terrifying calm, she added, "Emma arrives on December 18th, flight QF9 from Heathrow via Dubai, landing at 9:40 p.m. She should be careful. Melbourne can be dangerous for foreigners." The room fell silent. My supervisor abruptly ended the session. Sophie was escorted out and later fired, but the damage was done. How did she know Emma's flight details? How did she keep obtaining information I had never shared? 2 weeks later, I found a small magnetic device under my car's bumper. That same day, a technician discovered button-sized wireless cameras in my apartment. Emma and I decided that Melbourne was no longer safe. We moved up our plans, not just to meet, but for a permanent relocation. I quit my job, sold almost everything I owned, and bought a one-way ticket to Edinburgh. I told no one about my plans, not even my parents, until I was already at the airport. At the boarding gate, I received one last message from an unknown number. "Distance is just a detail, Daniel. Some relationships are meant to last forever. See you soon." In the first few months in Edinburgh, I jumped at every unknown call. I obsessively checked the streets behind me for familiar faces. Emma noticed my moments of acute paranoia, how I constantly examined new social media connections for fake profiles. "She can't reach you here," Emma tried to reassure me. I almost believed her, until I received an unmarked postcard on our first anniversary in Edinburgh. The image showed Edinburgh Castle with a simple message: "Closer than you think." We moved. Again the following week. I won't say where. Some people say running away doesn't solve problems, but they don't understand that some obsessions don't respond to reason or boundaries. Some people don't accept no as an answer because in their distorted reality, you never really said no. You just haven't said yes yet. Sometimes I wonder where Sophie is now, if she's finally moved on. Other times, I instinctively check my car for trackers, scan my apartment for hidden cameras, and always, with every unknown number that calls, with every email from an unidentified sender, I feel the familiar chill of fear, not just of Sophie, but of the fragility of the security we all assume we have. Because the most disturbing lesson wasn't about Sophie, but about how our digital and physical lives can be infiltrated by someone determined enough. About how, even 10,000 miles away, we can never be absolutely certain that we're truly alone. I was only 15 when I met Lucas. It was my first year of high school and he was 2 years older, with the kind of confidence I mistook for maturity. Looking back, the signs were there from the very beginning. But how could I have recognized them when no one had ever taught me how to identify danger disguised as love? At first, he was attentive in a way that made me feel special. He sent messages asking where I was, showed up by surprise in my classroom, carried my books between classes. He told everyone I was his girl, and that seemed romantic. Someone finally choosing me, wanting me. The transition was so gradual that I barely noticed it. First, there were the comments about my clothes. "Aren't those pants too tight? Everyone's looking at you." Then came the questions about who I was talking to. "Why were you talking to Ryan? He's obviously interested in you." I started calculating my responses, carefully choosing my outfits, justifying any interaction with other boys. My anxiety grew when I couldn't respond to his messages immediately, knowing I'd be accused of ignoring him or betraying his trust. 3 months after we started dating, Lucas grabbed my arm tightly enough to leave marks when he saw me, talking to a childhood friend. Later, he apologized, saying he just got jealous because he loved me too much. I believed him. I needed to believe there was a justification beyond violence. The words came before the blows. Slut. Stupid. Tease. Whispered when no one could hear. Always followed by, I'm just kidding, or, you know I love you, if I showed discomfort. My friends began to distance themselves, tired of the constant drama, of how Lucas always ruined group outings with his jealousy fits. The incident in the cafeteria was a turning point. Lucas approached while I was having lunch with some classmates. Come here, he ordered. I want to show you something. When I hesitated, he grabbed my wrist. Now, I let myself be led into a less crowded hallway where his friends were gathered. Now I realize he had planned everything. He wanted an audience. Give your boyfriend a kiss, he demanded, pulling me toward him. I turned my face away. Not here, Lucas, let's go back to the cafeteria. His face hardened. Are you rejecting me in front of my friends? I just don't want to do this here, I murmured. Lucas grabbed the back of my neck, forcing my face toward his. I tried to pull away, but he tightened his grip. Why are you being so frigid? He hissed, while his friends laughed awkwardly. It's just a kiss, for fuck's sake. I managed to push him away and quickly stepped back. Later, I received a message. You made me look like an idiot. You're going to pay for this. The payback came a week later. I was listening to music in the courtyard during a free period when Lucas appeared, yanking my CD player out of my hands. I need this, he said casually. I'll give it back later. That player had been a birthday gift from my parents. I stood up and followed him. Lucas, give it back, it's not funny. He turned around, a cruel smile on his lips. And what are you gonna do about it? Something inside me snapped. Maybe the last piece of the girl I had been before him. I stepped forward and grabbed my CD player. I said, give it back. I didn't see his fist coming. I only felt the impact on the side of my face, the world spinning as I collapsed to the ground. The metallic taste of blood, the sharp pain radiating from my temple to my jaw. Teachers intervened quickly. Students who had witnessed it confirmed that Lucas had hit me without provocation. The consequence? 3 days of detention. His defense that she lunged at me first was enough to soften the punishment, even though witnesses contradicted his version. My parents wanted to press charges, but I begged them not to. I was ashamed. I felt partially guilty. Maybe I had lunged at him first. Maybe I should have just let him take the CD player. The twisted logic of someone who has already internalized abuse. I ended the relationship over the phone, with my mother by my side. Lucas alternated between begging and threats. For weeks I received messages that shifted between I can't live without you and you're going to regret this. I started changing my routes at school, avoiding certain hallways, never being alone. Eventually he found another girlfriend. From a distance I watched the same pattern repeat, the possessiveness disguised as devotion, the gradual isolation, the frightened looks in her eyes. I thought about warning her, but fear kept me silent. That is the most enduring legacy of abuse, the silence that lingers even when we are physically safe. I kept track of Lucas over the years, a form of vigilance born from trauma. I learned that he was expelled in his final year for assaulting another student, that he briefly attended community college before dropping out, that he had a series of girlfriends who never stayed for long. Almost 10 years after our relationship, I found his name in an online news report. Lucas, now 27 years old, had stabbed a man in a bar. The victim had intervened when Lucas was physically assaulting a woman, his girlfriend at the time. The man survived, but with severe injuries. Lucas was sentenced to 8 years in prison. I sat motionless in front of the screen, a storm of emotions running through me. Relief that he was behind bars, unable to hurt other women, at least for now. Sadness at the predictable path his violence had taken. Anger at the system that ignored the early signs, allowing small abuses to escalate into attempted murder. Most of all, I felt a sharp pain thinking about the woman in the bar, about all the women between me and her. If someone had taken seriously the punch I received at 15, how many others could have been spared? Today I work as a counselor in a high school. I pay special attention to the signs. The girl who suddenly changes her style of dress. The boyfriend who shows up at every activity uninvited. The fingerprint-shaped bruises quickly hidden. The constant glances checking if they're being watched. I tell my story when appropriate, showing young women that survival is possible, that their instincts deserve to be trusted. My physical scars have long since disappeared. The invisible ones remain in how I double-check the locks at night, in how I analyze escape routes in new environments, in how I still hesitate before openly confronting an angry man. But those same scars have given me a purpose, to make sure other young women recognize the signs I couldn't see. Because the first punch is rarely the first act of violence. It's just the first one that can no longer be disguised as love. If you like these stories, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring even more amazing content. Also, check out the next video. You won't want to miss it.